Hey everyone, this is Dylan Moore with the Volitional Science Network. Today I want to talk about what I believe is the most important variable in intellectual self-defense, which is actually responsibility. In my course of figuring out a lot of the things, a lot of the tools that I use in my own intellectual self-defense, one of the things that kept coming back to me was how people addressed their own and other people's responsibility. So, first of all, what I mean by responsibility is, if you look right at the word, it's your ability to respond, which is another way of saying your ability to choose. It's the exercise of your own free will over the things which you have control, right? So, I'm responsible in my daily life for taking care of myself, for paying the bills of my home, for going to work, for taking care of my wife, for taking care of my child. These are the things within my responsibility, and people naturally look at me and should expect those things, and they say, look, that's your responsibility to do those things. What the sophist does, we can describe in many different ways. You could say, okay, they pretend to use reason when in reality they're dominating you. This is the way I've described it mostly in my other videos. However, another way that we can look at it, and I think this is a more potent way of looking at it, is that the sophist manipulates responsibility in order to manipulate you. So, because when we're talking about manipulation, well, whether we use this, dominance language versus reason language or whatever, it all comes down to choice. What choice can I get you to make? Now, I can negotiate with you about you making that choice, and I can try to dominate you about making that choice, or the same thing could go around. But when we're talking to each other and we're making decisions, the fundamental thing that we're doing is figuring out who is going to make what choice. Now, to be manipulative with somebody is to get them to make a choice. I was going to say not in their best interest, but I guess you could manipulate somebody to make a choice in their best interest, which that would be an interesting topic for another video. But it's to manipulate someone into making a choice that they don't necessarily want, or to manipulate someone into making a choice that benefits me at the expense of you. Whichever way you want to put it, we're working with the person's ability to make a choice. To give an example of this, because this is very theoretical, to bring this down into something that's much more practical, and I will guarantee you that you have run into this specific phrase at some point in your life, probably many, many times. I want to give a specific example. I was living with a friend in Austria. He was one of the two American guys that I made friends with my entire time I was in Europe. And at some point we ended up in the same apartment in Vienna. And he was this very, very heavily military guy. He was special forces, I think in the Marines. And his entire professional life was essentially spent in the military. And you could tell in his thinking and the way that he interacted around everybody that he was still very military mindset. And which is fine, but if we're living together, we you don't just get to order me around. Well, not that he was ordering me around, but I mean, just because I'm not following the military way of doing things doesn't mean that you get to assume that I should. So at some point, I brought up to him that I didn't like the way that he was interacting with me, and we got into a conversation about it, and as we went back and forth, at one point he said this to me, and this is the thing that I will guarantee that you've heard before at some point in your life, and it pissed you the fuck off, which is, this is the way I am and you can't change me. Or this is the way I am and I can't change. This is just the way I am. When somebody does this, and it's super frustrating, because there's no way to argue against that. If somebody claims that this is the way I am, if you get into, well, maybe you can change, and maybe if you thought about it this way, and all of that is completely ineffectual, because if the person wants to be obstinate, they could just keep repeating it. This is the way I am, can't change. This is the way I am, can't change. This is the way I am, can't change. What's going on when somebody says that? Because what they're saying, if we bring this back to responsibility, is they said, I am not responsible for this situation that you're bringing to me. Do you guys see that? Because if I was responsible, that would mean I have the ability to choose not to do it. But because this is the way I am, and I can't change, I do not have the ability to make a choice about it. Therefore, I can't be responsible for it. Now, what this also does, and this is where the manipulation is occurring, is the fact that if I can't change, that means you have to. Because in the situation where me and him had this disagreement, and I'm saying, look, I want you to change your behavior. When he says, I can't, that's him saying, I must. Because we've arrived at an impasse. He's doing something that I don't like. I want him to change. He doesn't want to change. So therefore, we are now both exhibiting behavior that the other wants to stop. Right? I want him to stop doing what has irritated me in the first place, and he wants me to shut the fuck up and stop getting him to change. Both of these can't exist at the same time. One has to give away, or I mean, both can give away, but at least one has to give away. And by him saying, I can't change, this is moving this way and it can't change, which means, well, now this has to move this way in order to deal with the fact that that can't change. I'm not responsible, therefore you are. This is why this is manipulation. It's looking at both people's free will, both people's ability to choose, and falsely identifying and falsely convincing the other person. Now, if I took that and I said, okay, Tarek can't change, well, now I have to figure out how to deal with it on my time. I have to do all the work to figure out how to deal with the fact that he can't change. What I said back was the thing that you're going to want to remember, because this is the perfect response to this. Is instead of trying to convince the person that he can change, you just say, oh, you identify the fact that there's a principle which says that people can't change, and you just apply the same shit to yourself. I said back to him, and I said, well, the way I am is when someone tells that to me, I respond to them in this way. I get in their face, and I get angry at them, and I make a problem. And I can't change. So now what? When I did that, what I'm doing when I say that is I'm taking the same thing that he's saying and applying it to myself. And now remember, we've arrived at an impasse, and he's saying, well, I can't change, so you have to. And I'm like, well, I can't change, so both of these can't happen at the same time. So what's going to happen? What I'm doing is I'm openly showing that manipulation is happening. Which, if we go back to the discussion versus domination way of breaking this down, is I'm openly showing we're in a dominate-submit situation. And what I've done is I've challenged his domination. And I've said, look, if you want to play this game, let's play. One of us is going to submit. And honestly, I don't know who. Maybe he would have won, but you're going to have to fight for it. And his response was beautiful. He immediately backed off, changed his behavior, changed his tone, and we had a much, much, much more productive conversation. This is how psychology works. Most of our interactions are actually dominate and submit. We are hierarchical creatures before we are reasonable creatures. And particularly because people don't really understand this, and they don't really understand the difference between the two, they will, we're constantly trying to dominate and submit people all the time. I am no exception to this. We're just constantly doing it. A lot of times we're playing with it. Especially guys will test each other all the time on this. But people are doing it all the time. So you have to get used to the fact that people are going to do it to you, and you have to hit back. You have to hit back. And in this case, my hitting back was simply taking the same thing that he said and putting it back onto him. In most cases, like in this case, my friend wasn't intentionally trying to dominate me. Now, the intention doesn't matter in terms of the fact that it doesn't change the fact that he's dominating me, but it does change the fact that he did want to get along with me, and I don't think he realized what he was doing. That's not always going to be the case. Some people really know that they're dominating you. However, when you challenge them like that, Most people are used to getting away with manipulative bullshit like that. I think this is kind of a modern phenomenon in the Western world, because, I mean, if you think back to the Midwest, if somebody, or I should say the Wild West, excuse me, if someone got a uppity mouth, they just got punched or shot or something. We're living in this bizarre age where people could just run their mouth and no one physically challenges them at that, or at least emotionally challenges them and gets in their face or yells back or whatever. We're just supposed to run around and be like, okay, the most important thing is we need to be polite. Even if someone wants to beat us up, we just need to be polite back, and that's the way to deal with it. No, fuck that. You need to learn to challenge people, and because of our polite day and age, it is super effective when you do so, because the same shit's gonna flip on them, where they're like, shit, I don't want to stir shit. I'm just used to dominating people and using manipulative bullshit, and it just works. Fuck, I'm gonna go find somebody else to do this on. So for that one specifically, if someone is ever claiming I can't change or you have to change, it's essentially if they here's the broad scope of looking at it. Some things can't change. Some things can. I have control over certain things, and there's certain things that I don't have control over. By falsely identifying one for the other. So if I put my free will aspect on something that I can't change, or I put a deterministic aspect on something I can change within myself, I am manipulating responsibility. Literally. Remember, responsibility is my ability to make choice. Choice involves free will. If I confuse my free will action with something that's deterministic and flip it around, manipulation is occurring. If I do that to somebody else, manipulation is occurring. We have entered the zone of dominate and submit. Now, the way to look out for this, and this is the general method, is look for people, or look for when somebody comes forth with an argument that can't be beaten, no matter what. So remember when my friend looks at me and he says, this is the way I am, you can't change me, there's no rational argument that I can give where he simply can't repeat that to beat it. Because if I come back and I'm like, look, have you thought about the fact that maybe you can change if you think about it like this, and you say, okay, and you do the internal work and you go to therapy and you blah, 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 blah. He could just keep repeating, well, I can't change, this is the way I am, I can't change, it's the way I am. I mean, you can't look at a rock and expect the rock to change by talking to it, so I'm the same way. It's like a rock, it's deterministic, I can't change. I like to call this, and I got the idea from a friend, rock, paper, scissors, chainsaw, laser, robot. Any boy who grew up in the United States is probably familiar with something like this, also known as rock, paper, scissors, nuclear bomb, rock, paper, scissors, fighter jet, where essentially rock, paper, scissors is a game where every option that you play against the other person has a winning option, a neutral option, and a tying option, and a losing option. So the game is always equal. But if one person is able to pull something out that beats everything else, the joke being that the chainsaw laser robot beats all three, rock, paper, and scissors, essentially the person is saying, I have this thing that I could say that wins no matter what, and it doesn't matter how well you rock, paper, or scissors me, chainsaw laser robot wins every time. If somebody is saying something, and you can sit and think to yourself that, okay, anything that I say, any argument that I give forward, doesn't beat that. This is the way I am and you can't change me. Or, one of my favorites, that's just your opinion. You can't, there's no way for you to know things, man. Oh, he didn't mean it. It's okay. All these sorts of things where nothing you can say beats it. Responsibility is being shifted around. Somebody is being manipulated. And the way to deal with it isn't by continuing to say, okay, well, maybe if I try rock this time, or maybe I try scissors this time, or maybe I try paper this time, or with my chess analogy of like, okay, maybe I need a really good chess move to combat this, when the person on the other side of the chessboard isn't playing chess, he's just knocking pieces over and say, well, I just make up the rules. You have to drop your circuit, drop to the domination submit level and engage the person on the dominate submit level in order to do anything about it. So I hope you found that useful, and we will see you next time for another conversation of intellectual self-defense.